Hello, this is Michael Back. I'm presenting um, Module 2 assignment, which is to create a course and then kind of describe the design influences that went into play, especially Merrill's 5 principles of instruction. Um, so this is a web accessibility training that hopefully I'll be presenting in fall 2024. So this was a great opportunity for me to get a head start on it and get some constructive feedback. And thanks so much for meeting with me on Friday and the spur of the moment. That definitely helped set me straight a little bit with some of the confusion. So I guess I'll get started. Of course, this has to do with Merrill's 5 principles. This is kind of the framework for the design. The 5 principles are that instruction should be problem-centered, there should be an activation, a demonstration on the part of the instructor, application on the part of the learner, and a planned integration on the part of the learner. So in designing this course, I think one of the things I didn't really talk about on Friday, but I'm just kind of curious about. So we talked about Merrill applying to the construction of an entire series of trainings. Does Merrill also apply to the activities within those trainings? We did talk about that. I'm wondering at the granular level, activity by activity, which of Merrill's principles apply there and which of them don't. So, for example, I guess my question is when the learner is in the application phase, how are they introduced to what they'll be doing? If they're doing 5 activities in a row, are they introduced to the 5 activities up front, or are they introduced to each activity in succession? And if they're introduced to each activity in succession, is it better to just start with step 1 and then work your way to step 5, and then for the next activity, step 1, step 5, third activity, step 1, step 5? Or is it something else? So I was just wondering about that. Go on to the next slide here. This is some of the course information that outlines the sequence of trainings. Ideally, I guess what I learned on Friday is Merrill being problem-centered always means that it's a scenario. So we're talking about web accessibility, which is kind of a general principle. I'm trying to think of scenarios where an instructor would need to use web accessibility, but the caveat there is they always need to use it, assuming that there's at least one person in their classroom with some degree of intellectual or other disability, they'll always need to do it. So it's hard to think of a specific situation, and I don't want to be like I don't want to say Susie's blind. How can we adjust our deliverables so that Susie can access them? To me, that seems kind of a weak application of the scenario based. So I still haven't decided exactly what those scenarios will be, but I do think what we have so far, different levels of tasks for the learners in this training who happen to be instructors. It should be a progression of tasks from least challenging to most challenging. So, as we went over on Friday, this was kind of my idea for the design of the whole series of training. So, what we might call the whole program. I used my background in outcome writing to kind of write outcomes for step 1 through 5. I think it worked pretty well. So, at the higher level, um, we're starting with a pre assessment. We're demonstrating 4 different groups of features throughout the training, series of trainings. Uh, the learner is going to gain practice, and then as a result of that, they'll be able to integrate it into their classrooms and develop accessible course content to reach uh, different learning abilities. So, as I said on Friday, you mentioned in this week's video that uh, most instructional designers only use Bloom's taxonomy. And I thought that was funny because I definitely had to raise my hand. That definitely applies to me. I Before this, I knew about Merrill. I knew kind of about a progression of tasks, and I was definitely interested in what students could do rather than what they could know. And I read Kathy Moore's book called Map It, and that I think she basically borrows Merrill's principles. But anyway, in my previous work as an instructional designer, I basically relied on Bloom's taxonomy and how to use it for scaffolding, and that's pretty much it. So, uh, out of curiosity, I did some analysis. This kind of shows you how each of Merrill's principles might align to Bloom's. Um, the reason I say might is because I superimposed my own, um, I guess, interpretation of what Merrill meant. So, for example, for activation, I thought it would be best if describe, define, and locate were the Bloom verbs that were used, and those are all level 2 understanding verbs. Um, but it's possible that activation might be lower, which is remember, or they might be applying something that they already know how to apply from the previous training. Um, so that's kind of the caveat with all this. Uh, as we go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, um, based on what I know previously about scaffolding, um, I would have expected level 1 to start at the bottom of the Bloom's pyramid, and level 5 would end at the top of the Bloom's pyramid. But as I saw with Merrill, that is not at all the case. So I think my entire understanding of scaffolding has kind of been flipped around, and they don't necessarily progress from each of the each of Bloom's classifications of the intellectual behaviors. Um, they progress through the 5 principles of instruction. So this is an introduction to the first training, which is called the web accessibility problem. In this part of the training, I want to introduce the learner to, I almost said what accessibility is, but that's knowledge-based. But they should be able to define what the expectations for using accessibility are, uh, because if they don't know that they have to do it, then they won't do it. So I think that's important. So my idea for here are the outcomes for the training. The orange bullet point is kind of an update of what we went over on Friday. The 3 check marks beneath it are my original ideas. So define web accessibility, use um, use the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and locate faculty and support sections for web accessibility. As I learned on Friday, these outcomes strike me as largely knowledge-based. So I would say, like, I would think of the content, the central topic is accessibility. And they need to know that they have to do accessibility, but they have to do something. Of course, even if they're defining something, they're still still doing an action. Like it's still a demonstrative, as long as there's somebody assessing it, formally or informally. So, is defining, in your opinion, is that a skill? Is defining something out loud a skill? Is providing a definition a skill? That's just a thought. That's kind of where I'm still a little off kilter with Merrill. Moving on. All right, so this is for the presentation one. I want them to be able to implement web accessibility in their course. The activation, I'm thinking of doing a pre-assessment, and I was wondering if there's a way to do a pre-assessment quickly and gather results like in an instant, and then somehow narrow the training down to what that particular group needs to focus on. That would be most beneficial given what their gaps in ability are. And then again, the demonstration is oh, I missed a part. I also wanted to show them what a screen reader sounds like when a document doesn't have the proper formatting. A lot of times when that happens, things tend to get repetitive. The computer will say header, paragraph 1. So just to hopefully produce some interest there. Section 3 is instructional demonstration. The instructor obviously is going to demonstrate the different skills, and then part 4, the learner is going to apply those skills. One thing I've been wondering about is if this is one lesson activity, is it okay to do the steps like this, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then next activity would be 3, 4, next activity 3, 4, and then the cumulative of all of that in step 5. And these are my references. I hope that was sufficient. I look forward to any of your feedback. This is definitely, like you said, this is definitely a paradigm shift. I think most, oh, I don't know if it's going to let me go back.